see. I'm not even seeing it. Maybe I did something wrong. Well, anyway, we'll roll with it.
Sure.
Because I'm usually getting it. I can usually get in there, but the app's being weird. Anyway. People can join live, so. Although right now, it's showing nothing.
I see the post.
Yes, the post will get you into this live deal. It says it's streaming to my LinkedIn profile and our YouTube channel, but why is it not? Technical difficulties. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I can get in there. All right, I can get in there on LinkedIn
Here it
on
is.
my computer.
Posted this.
There we go.
Welcome to our live show. Okay, yep, I see it now. Great. Okay, there it is. Yeah, I was looking like an idiot, looking all over the place for the screen on the live show.
All right, we got somebody, a few folks joining. Okay, technical difficulties as always. All right, well, let's see. All right, we'll start rolling. I know nobody ever shows up exactly on time to these things, so we'll just roll with it.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, Eric, welcome. This is going to be exciting. For everybody that's joining live, or if you're going to listen to this later, we're going to introduce ourselves really briefly in case you don't know who Eric and I are. And yeah, we'll start with that and then we'll jump right in. So, Mike Grinberg, I am the CEO and principal at Proofpoint Marketing, and I focus on helping consulting firms and advisory firms build sustainable growth systems. Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm the co-founder of a company called Prolific Growth, and similar to Mike, we help professional services organizations, namely consulting and advisory firms, grow and scale through various means, specifically around go-to-market strategy, sales training and execution, and now a lot of ecosystems and partnerships discussions as well, which is why I'm excited to be here with you, Mike, talking about this today.
Yeah, this should be fun. So, again, as far as who we're talking to here, if you're here, you are most likely a consulting firm founder, partner, leader, or you are in a leadership function in either marketing or business development. In either of those cases, you're gonna walk away from the conversation today with something valuable. By the way, as folks are joining in, if you are in studio with us live, which I'm seeing a few people are, you'll see a call-in button at the bottom of your screen. As we get rolling here, we'll start taking questions and things too. So if you want to talk to us live, ask a question, you will be able to do so. And we'll bring you into the studio and do that. If you don't want to be on camera, first of all, you don't have to turn on your camera. You can just come on audio. But if you don't want to do either of those and you just want to ask a question, pop it in a chat and we will be happy to, take a little tangent and answer your question. So, all right, let's get rolling here. So, Eric, you mentioned ecosystems. We are talking about ecosystems. I think as a very high level concept, people probably know what an ecosystem is. But the question is, why ecosystems? Why is this important? If I looking at work I've done with a number of firms, when you look at the average firm, the average firm grows at what, 5 to 10% a year. That's a successful firm that's actually growing. And they usually kind of go in this, starts and spurts, if you will, where you have years of, nothing, and years of maybe slightly faster than that. But it's kind of that feast and famine cycle that everybody talks about in consulting, but nothing's really done about it a lot of the time. You know, we're going to talk about really the goal here is by focusing on ecosystems, and we'll talk about what those are, you should be able to, double or triple that, like to 15 to 30% consistent, sustainable. That's the objective of doing this, and that's the kind of the long-term view that we're going to want to take. And when we think about what is an ecosystem, so it's, at least my definition, Eric, I'm curious on yours. I define it as, interconnected relationships within an industry or category, and then the value exchange between those participants or amongst those participants to make that ecosystem work. That's how I define it.
Yeah, I think I'd probably echo a lot of that, and I would imagine the gap with a lot of professional services people, whether they're consultants, advisors, or really anyone else that offers kind of their time in exchange for, money. It's that value exchange piece between those different points within the ecosystem that often gets missed.
Yep.
We'll probably get into this here later, but a lot of consultants, a lot of advisors that kind of pride themselves in having a vast and robust network, basically knowing a lot of people in a lot of different areas. But we'll probably talk about this here in a minute, but tapping into that network and ultimately understanding what that value exchange really looks like, I think is critical.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we think about the visual that I get when I think about ecosystems is like a mind map or like a web, right? Of there's little dots, and the dots are the different participants within that ecosystem, which we'll talk about the types there are, but vendors, partners, event organizers, etc. And then the lines in between them is how they're connected, and that's sort of where, like you said, people I think stop. But the reality is what makes that ecosystem work is that value exchange. Each of those lines is a particular value exchange. And if you want to tap into that ecosystem, you have to understand what that is.
Yeah.
And like, as an example, there's a line between, say like technology partners and event organizers, for example. Well, you have to understand what that line in between is, between the two, and understand what that value exchange is. And then that allows you to tap into that, those two endpoints, if you will.
Yeah, the best consultants that I've had the pleasure of working with, and for background, I come from the consulting space, right? I used to be a consultant. I tell people I'm a recovering CPA because I started my career in public accounting and kind of went that whole consulting route before I started selling these types of services and ultimately coaching and training and consulting myself on these types of services. The thing that I see as kind of the common denominator of the best delivery consultants are the ones that I call kind of integrators. And those are the individuals that understand all of those endpoints within an ecosystem and understand the lines between and are able to bring those parties together when there might not be a direct connection between those two endpoints in the first place. And I think, again, like just to echo what you just said, whether it's event organizers and technology providers or service delivery partners and those same technology vendors, whatever that map looks like, there's just an understanding that you need to have as a consultant around what all those pieces are, and then ultimately how you can drive that value exchange when those endpoints aren't directly connected.
Yep. And that's so something interesting you said, which is, sometimes you have to create that that connection, and that's interesting. I think a lot of the time when you hear the talk about ecosystem and ecosystem-led growth and all this kind of stuff, it's about creating the ecosystem, which I actually think is a trap, if you will, for consulting and advisory firms, because you're generally operating in a very immature market category, right? Not everybody. There's something like, for example, if we're talking about some like AI consulting or something like that, where it's so new, the ecosystem might not exist yet, then yeah, go ahead and work on building it like as the category develops, sure. But for most others, like whatever, say you're a change management consulting firm or a CPA firm or I mean, you name it, right? Whatever, biotech consulting firm, doesn't matter. There's a very established ecosystem that's already there. It's present. So your job at that point is figuring out how do you tap into it, right? Versus, and how do you, I don't want to use the words like take advantage of it because that's all about taking and that's part of the problem with how people approach it. But I think that's an important distinction to make is this conversation is not really advising you to go build the ecosystem. I don't think that's realistic. It's too expensive, takes too long, and most firms just don't have the resources realistically to do it.
Yeah, it's a good point you make. It's about finding it. You say tapping into it, really inserting yourself into what's already existing. I'm sure this is going to be relevant and might hit the mark for a lot of the people here that will be listening to this later or that are in the session today. But there's this concept of kind of the seller-doer model where a lot of consulting firms, have their partners or their senior managers or market presidents or managing directors, whatever the title is, right? The higher ups, they're not only responsible for doing some of the work and providing that delivery excellence to their clients, but also they're responsible for building the business. And these aren't salespeople. These aren't marketers. They're used to, normally it's a relational selling model, right? They worked with some people in a previous life, or they used to consult for them, or maybe they started their careers together, whatever that looks like. Maybe they're country club buddies. And that's kind of how they start to grow, their business. But as we both know, right, that's not scalable, right? We can't really expect to continue to grow year over year with the same percentages as before, because eventually that network, right, will exhaust itself. So it's about finding, for lack of a better word, another network that is outside of your own that already exists that you can tap into and then contribute to, as you said, Mike, not just taking from it, but also making sure that your value is accretive to that ecosystem that already exists.
Yeah, I think the you brought up the doer seller model and kind of the plateau of the immediate network effect, if you will, are both really, really important because that gets into the whole idea of limited resources. So how do you maximize the time and budget, if you will, that's available to you inside a firm, and then maximize that for biggest impact? And that gets us into also then it's still the path to building trust and credibility. We'll get into that. It's still a fairly straight line in terms of it's got to come from the people. So it has to be those managing directors or practice leads or market presidents. Again, like you said, it doesn't matter what the title is. But again, they don't have all the time in the world to do that work. So what should they be doing, right? And the kind of the first thing that usually comes to mind is, oh, we got to do thought leadership. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the question of how is an important one because, thought leadership can't be manufactured. It's an outcome, right? I think that's the misconception of like, oh, well, I'm going to be a thought leader, right? It doesn't matter, like whatever. Sure, maybe you've spent 20 years doing the work and you're known within your network, but that does not make you a thought leader necessarily. Thought leader is the outcome. Like you have to be elevated to that position within that ecosystem you're trying to tap into. So, again, what is that value exchange to become the thought leader, right, within that ecosystem? What do you have to give to be able to get back that elevation of your title to thought leader within that ecosystem?
Yeah, it's almost like earning it, right? So. It's not something that you're just going to come in and, like you said, bang your chest, stamp your feet, and say, "Hey, I'm a thought leader in whatever AI analytics now," or whatever the thing is. That's not how it works, right? Maybe you know a lot about it, but no one else knows that you know a lot about it. And so you kind of have to start disseminating that knowledge in some way, shape, or form so it kind of percolates through the ecosystem as it exists until people start viewing you the way that you want to be viewed. And then you have that authority. I like to use with all of my clients and the organizations I've worked with this concept of like how people buy anything B2B. And it's, I think, especially true with professional services. And there's kind of 7 stages to it. And I won't go into too much detail, but it's awareness, understanding, interest, trust, credibility, ability, and timing. And so those first 3, awareness, understanding, and interest. Whether you're selling to an end client or selling yourself to this ecosystem you want to tap into, the awareness piece is they need to know who you are, right? They need to understand that you exist and your relevance to this particular environment. The understanding piece is they have to get it, right? Whatever it is that you're saying needs to make sense to them. And then the last piece is interest. If it's not interesting or not relevant to that particular ecosystem, you'll never be viewed as that thought leader that you're trying to tap into. And that works for your clients, that works for the ecosystem, that works for really anyone. And so when you start thinking, I think, through that lens, it's a little bit easier to kind of practically get there insofar as like, how do I become a thought leader in this new space or this existing one that I really want to break into?
Yeah, and I think the important part there is like what's valuable to them. So again, that gets us back to understanding that value exchange. So if there's an industry event, well, what does the event organizer want? I mean, again, this sounds like kind of entry level to a certain extent, but it's so often forgotten, I feel like, or ignored. Like, the event organizer wants maximal butts and seats at the end of the day. That's how they make their money, right? And not only that, they want those same butts to come back the next year and the next year and the next year. So what is it that you can provide to them that does that?
Yeah.
So what can you provide as a sponsor, as a speaker, as an attendee, as an exhibitor, et cetera, et cetera. So like, it doesn't matter what it is, but how can you help them do that? And what is that pitch that you can make to them? And again, that's just one example. But when we're talking about that value exchange within the ecosystem, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's similar to, I think, any real sales cycle too, whether you're selling a product or whatever else. Like, you're not always asking for something in return. Sometimes you're just kind of doing what I call making deposits in the bank, so to speak. And so you're really just kind of contributing some type of value over and over and over until you can, have enough in there that you can withdraw, right? A lot of people, whenever they're either selling something, want to create a partnership or tap into an ecosystem, their mind is immediately like, what can I get out of this? As opposed to, what can I put into this over time that's going to grow and compound and maximize for myself in the future, right?
Yeah. So I think maybe it's important to further define kind of the components of an ecosystem, if you will. Like, I think a lot of the time when people think ecosystem, they think partners and clients. Like, that's my ecosystem, right? It's really the network. And the reality is it's so much broader than that. And I think that's that reframing of what an ecosystem is where kind of at least the first part of the magic happens, because that's how you can make it more sustainable and also more capital efficient and all those things that we really want as consulting firm founders that want to grow. So like, if we think about who are the parts of the ecosystem, well, yeah, it's clients, it's partners, technology partners, whatever, but then it's the influencers or key opinion leaders within that space. It's the event organizers, which you already mentioned. It's the industry publications and their editors, right? So you have to think about not just the organizations, but also the people within it, right? It's obviously your employees, but then it's competitors, right? I mean, if you think about, like, so often, you look at these, like in the Fortune 500, a lot of these partnerships are actually competitors doing joint ventures. And it's not really thought of in that way for mid-size firms or something like that. Like, especially in consulting, I feel like a lot of it feels adversarial a lot of the time. And then, on top of that, you have both complementary services, all this kind of stuff. So, like, really thinking broader. And then, one other thing I'll say is, like, for a lot of those, you have to think about past, present, and future. So it's employees past and present. Like, just because they don't work for you anymore, they're still part of your ecosystem. Uh, Influencers. Like, think about future. Think about who's an up and coming influencer who you can help, and they will at some point then reciprocate in response. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So just really reframing what that is, I think, is important.
Yeah, yeah. On the influencer topic, I mean, it's pretty easy, and I make this recommendation to almost every client I work with. But if you're trying to, say, promote a particular service offering or a practice area or whatever the subject matter is, a really easy way, and either you don't have a big audience or you want to tap into a different audience, a really easy way is to use what you're just describing, right? A piece of that ecosystem that's already plugged into that market. So, for example, maybe maybe you're a finance advisory firm and your main clientele are CFOs, but they see you as finance advisory and you want to start doing data analytics work or something like that. Well, it's really hard to kind of convince your audience that you also start doing this other thing without demonstrating it. And so find someone that already speaks to them, that they already view as experts in data and analytics or whatever the thing is that you're trying to get into, and borrow that audience, right? Find something that you can offer the podcast host or the influencer or whatever it is in this case. Sometimes it's outside expertise, a new perspective, an outlook on a particular industry, whatever it is, that they don't already have or that they could do more of, they could do with more of. And then that's how you tap into that ecosystem, or at least start to tap into that ecosystem with that particular piece. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit more, Mike, with you about some kind of practical examples, and maybe we start talking about that closer to the end around, like, how do people actually do this? There's obviously all of this stuff out there. There's a lot of noise.
Yep.
And I'd prefer to have some people leave this with some steps, right? It's like, okay, like, here's what I want to do. Here's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Well, and there's a story that, as I'm thinking about this, comes to mind. So I have that maybe will illustrate this a little bit. And again, I think kind of going back to this idea of reframing what an ecosystem is, and I think people need to get a little more creative. So the example is totally outside the consulting space, but I think it illustrates the point. So I have a friend of mine here. Him and his wife are real estate agents, and they started noticing some, like, traffic coming to them from a divorce lawyer. Like, what the hell is going on? Now, that's because they had built up the reputation in the market of being very kind of, people first, and understanding the needs, et cetera, and somehow this divorce lawyer heard of them. So then finally they connected. Like, again, if you think about divorce lawyer, real estate, what the hell is the difference? Like, or what's the connection? But, well, when people get divorced, they oftentimes have to sell their house, right? And not something that most real estate agents would ever think about, but they did. And now I can't remember, he told me last time, but it's a huge part of their business now, because they sort of decided to think outside the box. They started a podcast together, all sorts of stuff. So again, they built into that. It wasn't like all of a sudden, hey, we should, like, completely partner and do things, but they sent referrals back and forth. They, that kind of thing, and then it just naturally built up into this type of partnership within the real estate and the legal ecosystem. So I just like that. I like that example because it's, again, a little bit out of left field if you kind of at first glance, but it's the same thing in consulting firms too, oftentimes.
Yeah, I like that example for a couple of reasons. Is it kind of illustrates a belief of mine, which is, like, if you're trying to tap into an ecosystem where you're trying to sell a client or you're trying to do X, Y, or Z, like, whatever the sale that you're trying to make, like, you have to have some type of strategy, some type of process around it. It's not just some willy-nilly thing. And so in the example that you just provided, this real estate group or the couple that sells homes, likely they had some other mechanism that they were using to get leads and then ultimately sell homes and do their business. And then all of a sudden they get this other source that they're like, well, wait a second, this is way more lucrative or way easier than what we were doing previously. And so their go-to-market, right, essentially in this example, I'm assuming, shifted to, instead of targeting the people that are selling the homes, it's targeting the people that know people that are selling the homes. So it's the same thing though, like you're still doing awareness building, you're still creating understanding and interest, you're still building trust and credibility in those 7 things that I mentioned earlier. It's just your audience is different. So the same thing with an ecosystem, right? You can sell direct to the end client, right? If you're targeting CFOs or CIOs or whomever of end businesses, you can certainly do that. Or I should say, you can sell to the ecosystem or whatever that avenue of people where you have some type of service that you can offer that target the same or that talk about or talk to the same types of people you're trying to target. But there has to be some type of plan or process in place. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, and I mean, an example we can give that's maybe a little closer to home is, and it's actually something I am personally working on for Proofpoint is find people who are investing in or acquiring firms that you service. Like that's one that I don't often hear talked about. A lot of time it kind of happens just by accident. For like I know a number of marketing agency founders that sort of got in just by accident with a VC firm, and now they get 50% of their business from that one VC firm. But for larger consulting firms, it's a little bit different. But again, if you do whatever, call it operations consulting, well, growing, if a private equity firm is investing, they're looking at how can I make this thing more efficient and make it grow. A lot of that is operations focused to be able to improve margins and use a better systems to scale faster and deliver more, et cetera, et cetera. So great. You can find a firm that specializes in that industry or market as an example. It doesn't have to be that. We talked about event organizers already, but that's a little bit of a longer play. But yeah, I think that there are some definite creative ways that consulting and advisory firms can and should be thinking about this.
Yeah, and it's, I think, getting out of that kind of give me mindset and really starting to think of what you said at the beginning, which is how do I contribute to this network, to this ecosystem?
Yeah.
You use private equity. I'm going to double click on that a little bit. A lot of consulting firms say or like to say, yeah, we work with private equity businesses or we want to work with private equity businesses, but there's a lot of different types of private equity organizations. Some are just deal guys, right, that acquire and kind of hold and let the management team do their thing. Others come in and a little bit more hands-on and really want to clean up operations and do a whole bunch of stuff, and it's probably a bunch of versions in between. So your market, right, the ecosystem that you're trying to tap into isn't just all private equity organizations. It's the ones specific to what you were describing, right? The ones that are thinking about operational change and everything else, and that's your value to them. The other guys that are just deal guys probably don't care.
Yep.
So again, what I just described is like a very rudimentary way of defining your ICP, right? But in this case, it's like who's the partner type of organization or who's existing in that ecosystem that you want to go after, as opposed to the end client.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so let's get into some of the, like you said, let's get into some nitty gritty here. The how. Okay. Well, let's use private equity as an example. So, kind of the typical thing is, all right, well, I want to go after private equity, so I'm just going to go and try to meet as many private equity people, tell them what I do or what my firm does, and see if there's an opportunity to work together. You can do that. That's like, I'm not saying don't necessarily. There is some opportunity there, but number one, private equity is hard to get in front of, like just using this example. So what do you do? Right. And this is, I talk about it in terms of connect, engage, and collaborate. Like those are the steps that you need to take that get you to trust and credibility, which we talked about, which is the end goal. Because once you have trust and credibility, they're going to go, yeah, I'll bring you into this new deal, or I'll bring you into my due diligence process, or whatever. And again, I'm using private equity as an example.
Yeah.
But this is true of anyone, right? So, like if I were to try to get in front of a private equity firm or a number of private equity firms, I would, number one, connect, right? And when I'm connecting, I'm not going, hey, let me tell you about me. Like, I'm offering them something, right? It might be something like, if I'm doing cold outreach, let's just say, it might be something like, hey, I see that your, investment thesis is, making, make this up, like, really improving the lives of family-owned businesses. Okay, it seems like a lot of your portfolio, or a decent chunk of your portfolio, is with consulting and advisory firms. I actually specialize in helping firms like that grow. I got this newsletter that I put out that you might want to share with some of your portfolio clients, for example. Let me know what you think. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It might be as simple as that as the first connect. Then it's engage. Well, can I engage them in conversation somehow? Can I go to an event or something? Can I attend a webinar where the private equity firm is hosting, for example, or something like that? Like, can I try to engage them in a conversation? But again, I'm not pitching them on my service. Then collaborate. Maybe I offer them, like, hey, I run this live event series. It's targeted at a lot of the same companies that you might want to get in front of as you're looking for deals that are looking to be acquired, or whether it's now or 2 years from now. They might want to learn from you in terms of what kinds of things do you look for, things like that. Let's do a thing, and I can talk about how, what you can do from a go-to-market perspective to get there, and you can talk about what else you're looking for, whatever. Mm-hmm. Cool. Now I've collaborated. Now, is that going to work with every single one? No, but that's much better than going, hey, come talk to me. Here's what I do.
Yeah.
And then over time, you do that a few times. Now I've built up trust and credibility because they have seen me talk. They have, it's not just blowing a lot of smoke, let's just say. So then maybe they go and decide to test me out, right? Now, again, that's my business. A change management firm is going to be different. An operations consulting firm will be different. A med tech engineering firm will be slightly different too. But you can still take those steps, right?
Yeah.
Connect, engage, collaborate.
Yeah, I like the way you put it. Connect, engage, collaborate. I mean, it's just another way of saying, at least in my opinion, kind of the 3 first steps of how people buy, which is awareness, understanding, and interest. Mm-hmm. So connecting is like, they got to be aware of you. You said engage, and so they have to understand what it is that you do and who you are. And then collaborate has to be interesting to them, right? Collaborate probably steps a little bit in the trust and credibility space, but you're absolutely right. Another practical example for what we were just talking about, private equity, there's probably a lot of organizations that the people that are listening to, that are working with, that are owned by private equity. So tapping into kind of their other portfolio companies is sometimes as easy as saying, hey, I'm working with one of your portcos today. This is what we're doing. You may or may not be aware of that. And oftentimes that leads to a conversation to say, well, wait a second, I didn't know you were doing that, or I didn't know you could do that. I definitely want to hear more because I have another organization that's very similar, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's kind of this, network effect, ecosystem management, whatever the frame is. But ultimately, it's at the end of the day, it's finding where all those nodes are within this environment and figuring out what that value exchange could or should be, and then doing it, right?
Yep. Yeah, and it like you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's creating a value exchange or connecting nodes that maybe weren't connected before. So maybe there's some regional industry event or something that these private equity firms don't know about. And you might be like, hey, I've attended this for the last 3 years. There are a lot of firms there that are looking to be acquired, a lot of companies that are, potential acquisition targets for you. You might want to check it out.
Yeah.
Now you've kind of created that, and you can, like, you want me to introduce you to the event organizer, like all these types of things where, again, understanding what that value exchange is. You can argue, okay, well, that's just networking 101, sure, but how many people actually do that?
Very few. I don't like the term networking in this context. Yeah. I use the term networking very, very loosely. Like, I'll go to an event and people tell me, what were you doing? Oh, I was networking, like whatever. That's not really quite what it means. A good example is, like, let's say you're very niche in your services. Let's say you do, M&A consulting in the biotech space, right? You do restructuring help, turnaround help, that type of thing, whatever that looks like for you. You should still position yourself, in my opinion, as a strategic advisor. So that way, whenever there's something that comes up that you hear because you're engaging with leadership at this organization, don't forget that not half, but a lot of your value proposition is that ecosystem, is that quote unquote network of all of the people that you know could help in other capacities. And so all of a sudden, if they're starting to complain to you about, their IT stack or something, maybe that's not something you guys do, but perhaps there's another organization that you're intimately familiar with that you can bring in. And so people think that's just networking, but at the end of the day, that's you tapping into an ecosystem of people that serve the same type of client that you serve in different capacities. And now you're doing that connection, that value exchange, where you're finding two different nodes, becoming that integrator, and elevating yourself as the person that both parties can rely on for that particular value exchange. And so you're thought of kind of as a leader in that particular space, and it just kind of starts to grow and compound. And so another practical example, I think, of using what we're talking about in this ecosystem environment.
Yeah. I think, the next thing probably worthwhile to talk about is, okay, connect, engage, collaborate, becoming, I forget your, aware, interested.
Awareness, understanding, and interest.
Awareness, understanding, interest, right? And then the goal is you're trying to build that trust and credibility. Great. Really the objective there overall is you're trying to become some central is maybe a bit too much, but some core part of that ecosystem moving forward over time, right? You get elevated to that thought leader position, and you're able to hold it, and that you're a core part of that ecosystem where people can just go, oh, check out what Erick's saying, whatever. So the work to get there though it's hard work. And I think, a big part of what I see is a lot of folks are looking for the easy button. Like for whatever reason, sales and marketing, it seems like, or business development, I'm sorry. I know sales is not it's almost like a 4-letter word in consulting firms, I feel like. But sales and marketing, for whatever reason, it's just thought of as an easier function. Like it's like, oh, this should be simple. I just sell or I just market. Like we're doing it. And I mean, not to go too much on a tangent, but the work is hard, right? Like what a big part of it is creating the alignment of how is it that you're going to market within this ecosystem? Like which part, like what are you going to prioritize first? Who are the people? Have you identified them? And then et cetera, and then aligning across sales, marketing, leadership, partnerships. If you're a bigger firm and you have like a VP of alliances or something of that nature, right? Like that happens quite a bit, especially if it's like a digital transformation firm, something like that. All those people need to be very much aligned on what is it that you're doing within the ecosystem? Who are you going after? Because if, oftentimes you'll see like, oh, marketing is they're going to go create this podcast. Totally made this up. And it's going to be the CEO, hopefully the CEO, sometimes it's not, talking about, what they do and whatever, and bringing on internal guests. Cool. There's nothing wrong with that per se. And then sales is going to go and, just go direct to clients, and then alliances is going to go and or partnerships is going to go and work with partners. That's great, but there's a complete disconnect and you're losing a hell of a lot of efficiency within that ecosystem versus, well, what if that same podcast is focused on talking to the same people that alliances is going after, and then sales, yes, they're going to go direct, but they're also going to have conversations with these people at events, let's just say, so they can help them make introductions, whatever. Like, put all those three things together rather than making them all siloed. So that alignment, I think, is step one that's very often missed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, time and time again, you just see a bunch of different people running in a bunch of different directions. Because the edict from leadership ultimately, or if it's the partnership group, is like, grow, go grow.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real plan behind it. And and then what ends up happening is either the consulting organization starts hiring a bunch of resources that they don't need because they end up just spinning their wheels trying to figure it out, or they get stuck in this space of like, I don't really want to spend money because we're not making money, and so I don't know what to do. And so they fail to kind of take a step back and create that alignment, like you said. And I think it needs to come from a mutual understanding of who are we targeting, what are we targeting them with, and what's the priority if something else comes up across sales, marketing, and partnerships. So everyone is saying one thing to the same audience. Rare to see in the professional services environment, unfortunately. But yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
well, and the other scenario that's very common too is, a lot of these, we'll call them multidisciplinary firms. They'll grow sort of by inertia, right? And you grow by, oh, well, it looks like we're doing more business here. We're going to create a department or a practice lead or whatever, and then a managing director, and then they turn into a partner, and now all of a sudden you're a $30 million firm that has 5 or 6 practice areas, each with their own partner who's going, well, what about me? I need
Yep.
this, right? So we're going to go after these people, we're going to go after these people, and all of a sudden you are completely spread too thin for the resources that you have at your disposal. And again, that ecosystem is all like you're almost going after 6 completely separate ecosystems.
Yep, exactly.
And that's just not realistic for a firm that size. So you have a big operational and like leadership alignment problem that needs to be solved before you can go and execute tactically against any of the stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah, some of the larger organizations I've been talking to and have worked with in the past, when I say larger, I mean like multi hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, still fail at that one thing. They have just a cornucopia of service offerings and things that they can provide the marketplace, and yet are confused whenever they lose deals to kind of the smaller niche guys, because they expect to be like the big four or the MBB that just sell on brand and reputation. There is a component of that, absolutely, but ultimately, especially nowadays, people aren't buying the same way that they used to, and so they're not sticking with the guys that they know just because they know them. There's so much opportunity out there and so much stuff, and so if you're a smaller guy or if you're a middle guy, you can steal a lot of work from the bigger guys nowadays if you do what you're talking about, Mike, in a more prescriptive and precise manner.
Yeah. So step one, we talked about alignment across the core functions, including leadership. Actually, I shouldn't say including, starting with leadership. Step 2 is understanding the ecosystem. We talked quite a bit about that already, but it's who are the players and what do each of them want and need? What are their desires? And I think that's, as I mentioned before, I think that's where a lot of failure happens. Partially, I think, because there is no tech that really helps you with this. Like, and maybe whatever, if anyone's listening, you want to build the tech for it. I don't know if it's possible, but like, there are CRMs, but CRMs are not built for it. CRMs are customer relationship management, right? Like they're not built and they're not good at helping you manage anything other than the customer relationship. So people don't. And most people don't, most of these firms don't use their CRM very well to manage the part of the ecosystem they can, which is employees and or clients, I should say, not employees.
It's funny you mentioned that, Mike, and sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, go for it.
One of the recent projects we completed for a client of ours was doing exactly that, which was kind of reframing the way that they use their CRM to capture all of the players that aren't just their customers. And so you can use a CRM to do this today. You just really need to think of it differently than the way that you probably are. Not you, I'm saying general you, which is, you've got your clients, right, the ones that are paying you for stuff, but your partners are also your clients. The influencers that you want to work with are probably also in some way your clients. And so everyone is just a client, just a different type of client. And the things that you would do to nurture those clients or deliver for those clients or whatever else will all look differently, obviously.
Yeah.
But
So
you can't
talk
build
about
that.
that. I mean, I don't know how much you can. I mean, you don't have to say which client it was for, but like talk about some of the things maybe tactically, because
Sure.
I do think that's a big problem is there
Yeah.
isn't an easy way to manage this. So it gets managed in a bunch of different people's heads. Like it's fine if you're a solo or like a 3-person firm. Okay, you can probably get away with that. And even then it's hard.
Hmm.
But when you're a 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 million firm, like that just does not work.
Yeah.
Right. So what are some of the things that you set up for this client
Yeah.
in the CRM and how they use it?
Yeah, so it's a lot of data kind of mapping, I guess you could say. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's just say they've got 100 accounts, and they probably had a couple thousand, if not more. But let's just say they have 100 accounts. These are their end businesses that they're trying to target. So, um, middle market, whatever, doesn't matter. And then, as an example, they had, we'll call it 5 or 6 different technology partners that they would implement those technologies for. So the first step is obviously understanding where that overlap is between clients and prospects on the consulting side and clients and prospects on the technology vendor side. And there are tools like Crossbeam and Reveal where you can do that and upload that information. But as far as the ecosystem goes, right, that's just one to one. But then you start thinking about what about this partner and this partner and this partner, and where do all of those map together, and how does that kind of relay itself into value for the end customer? Maybe maybe the end client is customers of all of these technology vendors, maybe just a handful, but there's probably some service offering that I, as a consultant, can deliver that can bring all these things together. So understanding that relationship was something that we did in the CRM at the account level. And then we went even further into the individual level, because this was HubSpot, for example. You can have kind of your company accounts and you can have your contact accounts. And so the end clients, right, the 100 businesses that were clients of the organization, they had the CFOs, the controllers, the whomever, right, all the contacts for those accounts. But then we also had the partners, the technology vendors as companies in the accounts, and then all of their salespeople, their marketing people, basically anyone on the business development team or the customer success team, also in the CRM. And we built nurture campaigns for that audience that was completely different than the audience of the end business. And so what ends up happening is you're kind of marketing to 2 different audiences, but saying the same thing, just in a different context. And so that in and of itself just allowed everyone at the technology vendor partners to be aware, understand, and be more interested in what the services were that this consulting firm offered. That's just one kind of minute piece of the overall thing that we did for this particular client. But as a tactical example, that's something you can do probably tomorrow. Might just take a little bit of time, but it's not hard. And then once you understand those relationships, right, you sell to them differently, right? The salespeople for the technology vendors are interested in probably different things than the customer success team is. And so how do you appeal to each of those? But if at the end of the day, one of your clients isn't happy with one of the products that they have and you happen to partner with them, you as the consultant can tap into the ecosystem, which is bringing in all of the relevant players from that organization to say, hey, there's a problem here, we need to fix it. Makes the client happy, makes you happy, makes the vendor happy because you were working with them in a way that was accretive to everyone, right? So you start doing that for all of those players that you're talking about, right? The influencers, the event managers, and whatever those titles look like in the ecosystem, and then all of a sudden you have a customer, right, relationship management system that's appealing to each of those.
Yep. Yep. So, the other thing we got to talk about is, like how to incentivize all the various players.
Oh yeah.
So we talked about aligning various players internally. So there's internal and external, but there's the question of, well, what's the incentive for marketing to do the work? What's the incentive for business development to do the work, et cetera, et cetera? The partners, the CEO, et cetera, things like that. And then, again, kind of thinking about that value exchange, then externally, like how do you incentivize your technology partner to send you business?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you incentivize anyway,
Yeah.
like people get the point. I don't have to keep listing for every single one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's kind of hard and soft incentives, right? The hard incentives are the things that are paper, the things that are documented. Like what are you getting measured on if you're on the marketing team? Is it the number of leads that come through the door, or is it revenue dollars? Because the way that the marketing team would operate are very different depending on which one they're getting measured on. Same for the sellers, right? I mean, it's usually pretty straightforward, right? It's a commissionable sale, then that's what they're going to drive towards. But if you're prioritizing, net new logo acquisition versus existing clients, then that's what they're going to go after because that's what they're incentivized to do. So I think internally with the hard incentives, it's relatively easy. You just have to make sure that those incentives are aligned towards whatever the goal or the objective of the organization is. I say easy in the sense of like putting them on paper, but then actually rolling it out might be a little bit of a challenge. But then as far as your question around the partners, right? How do you incentivize them to bring you business or whatever else? You have to understand what it is that they want, right? Do they want new business? Do they want intel? Do they want to use your brand or use your reputation to say, hey, we partner with these big dogs to come, you should think about us. Like whatever that thing is, it's understanding kind of that value exchange and then incentivizing them through that.
Well, like the other thing is a lot of the time, at the end of the day, what you're hoping and what your objective is by doing this is that you're gonna scale referrals. Like that's the objective. That's what makes this capital efficient long term. That's what makes this sustainable long term. But how do you do that? And I think a lot, part of it is you have to give, like you were talking about, you have to give before you take. So I think a lot of it comes down to creating a culture of referrals within your organization. Like you as the business development person should be the first to go and whatever, to your technology partner or to whoever, your adjacent service provider, partner, informal or formal, and say, hey, you should talk to this person. Hey, I was talking to so-and-so. I think they might, need whatever. Can I make an introduction? Things like that. Because there's the basic concept of reciprocity that exists.
Oh, yeah.
And broader than you can do that both on a one-to-one, but also on a kind of a scaled basis in terms of, again, if you can bring these people, bring a technology partner into your orbit and have them get access to your network. So whether that's through an event like this or a live event that you're hosting or whatever, maybe you invite them as a speaker to your customer advisory board, whatever, right? There are a bunch of tactical ways that can look like, but by doing that, you've sort of taken that first step, right? You've created the possibility of reciprocity, either on a one-to-one or a one-to-many basis. And I think it's creating that culture where you're always taking the first step, whoever you are, whether you're a partner, a business development person, a marketer, a CEO, et cetera. And I think it has to be kind of permeate the entire organization.
Yeah, and also as part of creating the culture, like making people comfortable with asking for referrals, right? There's a little bit of an art to it, right? You want to make sure it's timely. Did you just make them happy with whatever it is that you delivered or whatever it was that value exchange was on your end that you contributed to? Might be a good time to ask for a referral. Hey, do you know anyone else that could benefit from X, Y, and Z? Or I really enjoyed doing A, B, C with you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. Yeah. It'd be great if you could connect me with someone else who, just like you, is struggling with X, Y, Z, right? So yeah, I'm totally there with you. It's the culture of reciprocity is critical in the ecosystem that you're tapping into, and then also how you're building that within your own organization and with the relationships that you manage.
Yep. So the other important thing, and we're kind of coming up on time here, is once you get to the point where your position has been elevated, and when I say your, it might be you as an individual or your firm. The way that you make this sustainable is you have to build a owned channel within that ecosystem. Now that could be not anything per se, but lots of different ways. It could be an event series like this. It could be a podcast. It could be a newsletter. It could be an event. Maybe it's an adjacent event to an existing, large industry event. Whatever. There are a bunch of ways to do it, but you need to own something. that people come to and they go, oh, well, whatever. If I am in AI and I'm trying to figure out something, I'm going to go to this thing, whatever that is, to learn, to engage, to whatever. It might be a community that you build, whatever. It all depends on what already exists in the industry and what else is needed. And then again, it's you leverage that channel both to create reciprocity within it, but then also to drive actual sustainable traffic and conversations and et cetera, all those things. You can't do it otherwise. Otherwise, you don't want to be at the mercy of the ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, like with anything, you got to drive it, right? If you want it, you got to make it happen. You just wait,
Yeah.
let it happen to you.
But
yeah,
you see that quite a bit, though, where you see companies that rely too much on others and never really build their own, and then all of a sudden something goes away, and you're like, oh crap, I just lost 20% of my. I was talking to somebody recently, and there was their focus was just technology partners, and they were going to do that. And there's a whole issue there if that's the only thing you're doing. But then they had one big one, and they had a falling out. There was the company got bought over, and what they wanted to do changed, and how they wanted to work with partners changed, and all of a sudden it's like, crap, you just lost 20%. And you have no other way to get in front of those people anymore because they owned those, and you never connected.
Yeah. And it goes back to what I said, I think at the very beginning, like, becoming the integrator, being able to identify all the nodes and the value exchange, like that's the first step, right? Is like, where are those nodes and how can I build a bridge between my own node and those other nodes, but then also creating the ones in between.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah. And, maybe to wrap this all up in a bow again, bring it back to the beginning, the idea here is that you're creating really a sustainable pipeline, right? And it's not like, this is not the predictable revenue model. I'm not talking about that necessarily. Like, you do get to that point where you can rely on this pretty consistently, but it's not a simple linear formula of bring in another salesperson, they're gonna whatever.
It's a matter of being proactive, right?
Well, and it solves a lot of the challenges that these firms have, like we talked about. It solves the doer-seller model problem where time is limited. It solves the intangible problem because you're selling a service, not a product. It solves a lot of these things because you've tapped into the ecosystem. You build up the credibility and the trust, and that's scalable. Right, and you can grow with it because everything else is more linear. This is actually more exponential.
Yeah.
Right, because if your goal is to grow at 15 to 30% a year, meaning if you want to double every 3 to 5 years, that's what we're talking about. You can't do that in a linear model. That has to be an exponential model.
Yeah.
So, and that's what an ecosystem allows you to do. And I've seen it, over and over and over again across pretty much industry agnostic as far as consulting and advisory firms are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk another couple hours on that alone, but just for the sake of time, no, I definitely agree with everything that you're saying, and I like your perspective. I think it's a little bit different than mine in some cases, but at the end of the day, it's pretty harmonious. And so I encourage anyone that's listening to this now or that's watching the recording back to reach out to either one of us and ask questions, right? I mean, either about finding the ecosystem, tapping into it, and then kind of some tactical frameworks on how to actually execute on those things. Be more than happy.
So for anybody watching, feel free to scan the QR code, connect with Eric and I on LinkedIn, and that's a wrap for us. I don't know, unless Eric, I don't know if there's anything else we can add to the conversation at this point.
No, that's it, man. Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it. Happy to reach out or happy to talk to anyone that reaches out. And at the end of the day, Mike, I'm sure you and I will have a lot more of these types of conversations.
All right. Definitely. Well, for everybody else, thanks for tuning in. And I'll be hosting these at least once a month, probably once every 2 weeks or so here. I got another one coming up actually next week. which I'll be sharing pretty soon. We'll be talking about operations and growth and all that fun stuff. So, all right, Eric, this was fun. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Mike. See y'all.